Hey guys, welcome to the Heart of David. Welcome to my channel. Hope you guys are doing well today, wherever you are. As you know, in these end times, what I want to talk about is people coming out and making their whole channels about that Paul's gospel is false, and that Paul is exactly who Jesus was speaking about. You know, when that people would come in afterwards and say, I am this and the Christ, and those types of things. And it's a really destructive. I'll tell you something. What I did not do is I did not write this down. I'm doing this all by memory. I'd like to do it that way. I know that if I write these things down, I will give you more points, but I want to show you that I just do this without preparation. See, it makes me think on the spot. I kind of want to show you that I don't need to do that, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not saying I'm anything. That's not what I'm saying. I believe in the end. I believe trying to do it by the Holy Spirit is what I'm saying. Okay, and certainly those things help. But let's just get into this. I believe that one thing that has spelt out the end of days, the end of, well, it's going to be the end of days for those who are not saved by Jesus Christ, but technology was needed for the end times to be ushered in. And maybe you're like me, I don't like technology. Like for videos, yes, for certain things, absolutely, but you know, when it's used for the evil, which it will, and that will way outweigh the good. As you see, I don't know if you can see the internet getting worse. I'm seeing stuff about this in Christian videos, and I believe it because I see it. And I believe so as the end times are approaching. There's a lot of apostate people, and there's channels out there that say this kind of stuff, and we know that Islam, that the Muslims believe that Paul was a false prophet. And you know, the thing is, the book of Daniel in the end had to happen with technology. It just did, and it was prophesied, not with those exact words, because there were no words back then to explain what this was and what was coming. You know, knowledge shall increase. You don't think Daniel saw what was coming when he did that? Just give me a second. People shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase. So he saw travel, and he probably saw computers. He probably saw computers, AI, and transhumanism. That's just what I think. But with this, destructive heresies have been allowed to just be perpetuated. And, you know, the worst thing about this is that what are you to do when you have someone who has 500,000 subscribers who, you know, the rest of what, hey, this is one of the worst kind of deceptions you can have, when the person is right on point with the Gospels. Everything about Jesus is correct. And but when it comes to Paul, no, he's false, and well, he's just false, right? He's who Jesus spoke about, false Christs. And it's unfortunate, and it's not to say that during the times of no internet, where you couldn't see the depth of the thoughts of people, yeah, you couldn't see the depths of that. Why did Paul's thing stand for so long? And were there people refuting this? And I'm not talking about this in the Muslim world, okay? They have their own thing. You would imagine that a lot of people that actually had access to a Bible, which we did for a long time, and then, like I'm talking after Luther, but when people started finally getting a hand, when they were able to have a Bible, certainly there were people who may have thought those things. And I'll tell you honestly that this was probably about 3 years ago, maybe 4 years ago, that I was studying the Scriptures intently as much as I could to understand the doctrines, understand the stories, and everything surrounding God in the Bible. And I watched a Christian video, and it was talking about how Paul is false, and I started to question my own self about this, and it was very destructive. All it takes is one little seed. It takes one little seed for you to completely go off course. And I understand where people are coming from in this. That one of the reasons why people refute this so much is because of their own lifestyle. Is that not it? That Paul opens up about things in a way that Jesus didn't. And so the question is, why was it canonized? Why was it put in the Bible? And it was obviously that important, right? So some of these people are saying that the apostles actually refused Paul's teaching. They refused Paul's teaching. And if you can show me a verse in Scripture where it says that, please put it in the comment section. Pardon me, I'm having a lot of problem with my abdomen because I did a video before this, so pardon me. Just give me a little break. It's my stomach. So that's all it takes, is just a little seed like that. So if you can show me a place in the Bible where it says that the 12 apostles, I know there were 11 and then there were 12, said this, because I don't see that anywhere. In fact, it's in Acts, right, when Barnabas and Paul have that dispute with the Judaizers, right? The Judaizers, but they believe in Christ, but they're still Judaizing, right? And they had to go all the way back to Jerusalem in Acts, and they had to go meet with the apostles, and they had some type of conference, right? And it was about circumcision. And then Peter came out and said a very important thing, which he said, where he reflects on him seeing that big blanket covering coming down from heaven, that the Gentiles are not, we put no, what did he say? He said we put no other things than, what we could bear ourselves, right? And he goes on to say that we are saved, the Jews are saved in the same way as the Gentiles are saved. So I have a question to ask you. Number one, for this who refute Paul, you see now in these end times a lot of things coming true. So one sure way to test if Paul's interpretation of things is correct is to look right now to see if any of the things that he said are coming true. So is it 2 Timothy, man, I always get these mixed up, but where he says in the end times, in the last days, and it's also, I believe, in Jude, right? Scoffers will come saying, where's the promise of his coming? And also, Paul gives a very clear indication of what people will look like. And boy, does he ever go into a long description of that. They will be boasters, they'll be proud, they will be hateful, right? There will be everything that you see when you turn on TikTok and YouTube today, with people who only think about themselves. But it went so far as to describe things that you wouldn't have seen then, that could only be today. Lovers of pleasure. No, it was in a way that it couldn't be described then, but Paul was describing today. Another thing he said was, when they shall say peace and safety, sudden destruction. And although that has, the destruction has not been fulfilled, we're right in a time where we're hearing peace and security like we have never heard we didn't hear that at any other time like this. So we're waiting for that. What else did Paul say? Please put it in the comment section. Here's another important aspect. So the people who believe this will say, how are we to know what happened was real? You hear one story that seems to contradict another. How was it on the road to Damascus, right, when the light shone around him? And there are, it differs a bit, right? It differs a bit from what Paul says, I think it's versus Acts. But this is the nature of stories. This is just the nature of the Bible. And it shows its beauty of it. I'm sure back then, who did he meet in Damascus? What was his name again, that man? Zechariah. I'm sure people probably spoke to that guy, but they didn't add it in the Bible. How about Jesus living with all his family? Why didn't James write down all Jesus' life? All the years he lived with Jesus. Why didn't he write about it? Because they just didn't write about it. That'd be a heck of a story, but so they question that part about the road to Damascus. How do we know? It's just him who was saying this. I'm sure there were other corroborators, and maybe he was in a position where he didn't care. Paul was one that wasn't worried about judgment from other people, right? I think it was necessary that Paul we have the Gospels, and we have some other writings from, Jude and stuff like that, right? Jude and James and Peter's and John's writings, other than Paul. I think it was necessary, other than just those writings, because of so much history that had passed, for someone who was in Paul's position. He was above he was probably above, he was probably in the 1% of the knowledgeable Pharisees, right? And with him going to the third heaven and seeing and realizing, I am the chief of sinners, that now Paul, what could he do with this and the revelations that were given to Paul? Paul could now remember all the scriptures. As you can see through all his writings, he reflects on just as it is written, right? And he reflects upon all these prophecies that help us know, and he explains it also in a way that gives it a further deeper description of the things that are going on behind the scenes of who Jesus was, why he came, why we're here, how we're saved, and that's by faith. If Paul's theology and beliefs were so destructive Why are they saving so many people? Because we know it's through faith through God. And Paul made that very clear. Paul didn't want to be anything. And if Paul would have met one of these people would understand very quickly that all Paul cared about was Jesus Christ. That, as John the Baptist said, I disappear as I do, right? He didn't want to be known for that. He preached Jesus. He preached Jesus right away after Zechariah. He went and preached right in the synagogue. Pardon me. But there's something even more important to you and I. You see, people think that, it does say to the apostles, that Jesus said to the apostles, go preach in all the world, right? But did they? No, they didn't do that. They went around and they were, from what we know, they were preaching to Jews. And we know this for sure. So why did Luke, who wrote Acts, he obviously, so you think Luke is apostate too? So you can't think that he is without that. Well, I suppose you could, but it wouldn't make sense. And they were so convinced in themselves too. You don't think that Paul and like people like Luke, who had a large connection to everything around that time, and many different cities, you're telling me that they weren't able to discern that Paul was false? I just could not believe that with any part of my heart. And as Paul says, he says, it was necessary that we preach to you first, but now that we know that you just consistently reject Christ, which is the unforgivable sin, right? They go their whole life, And then Paul wrote Romans 1, which shows, man, that's the one that people don't like, where they say, is it a sin to be gay? They didn't say this, he didn't say that, male, female. Jesus was very clear. Jesus is the Bible. He is both the Old and the New Testament. He made them male and female. Even the birds and the animals understand their time, understand what they are, but humans don't. And so, maybe at one time in my life when I was, and I'm not done, when I was, doing drugs and drinking and partying, right, and doing all those things, would I have liked to hear anything about Paul? Certainly not. I think that one of the reasons is that people wanted an excuse to be able to live a certain lifestyle. And of course this becomes a popular thing for someone who preaches this, that thinks that they're in the Gospels, and they are just looking for a large following. Yeah, maybe they believe all this, and I'm sure they do, but they know that half their viewership or more is Muslims. But it's very destructive. So show me in the Gospels where they were refuting that Paul was anything. And if you use this, you're wrong. Where Peter says, there are writings that Paul has that are very difficult to understand, and people twist them to their own destruction. That means that the apostles had obviously learned what those were, Paul's writings, as they sent them around to different churches, and they understood them. And they understood that people will use them to twist them to their own destruction. Only Paul could have written in this manner to explain it in such a beautiful way. It may take you some time to understand Paul's writings. And one of the complaints about this is they've made it more about this than Jesus Christ. You know, that might be easy to think and stuff like that, but Paul shows how to endure, right as Jesus tells us to endure. So what is the most important thing of this? The apostles did not go out and preach to the Gentiles. Show me where. Show me where they went out and were preaching alone to the Gentiles. And I know you're going to say, like, what's his name? The apostle that died in India or so, whatever it is. Listen, the evidence points towards that they were preaching to Jews wherever they went, right? And when they meet together, Barnabas and that council, the Jerusalem council, they said, we accept, like, for us, we go to Jews, you go to the Gentiles. And as the scriptures in Isaiah, all throughout the New Testament says that there's a light to the Gentiles, you know? There has to be someone. So who was it? Who was this light to the Gentiles? How was it spread around? It wasn't by the Jews who did it. It was Paul. That promise in the old scriptures was Paul. So, what else would I add to this? I get it if you're having trouble with Paul's writings and stuff like that. I think, as Peter explained in his epistle, that, you know, there are some writings hard to understand. And, you know, Paul even called Peter out for refusing to eat with a Gentile. Paul was doing right. He was enduring. He was keeping his faith. And to look at his story and not think, look, man, that snake bit him on Malta and he did not die. That would kill anyone else. 3 shipwrecks. This guy was indestructible. Not only that, but there's obviously corroborating evidence, because it says that he raised up, what was it? Not Lazarus, but what was his name there? The guy that fell out of the window. I know his name off. As Paul was preaching, you know, throughout the morning and the night or whatever, he fell out of the window. And Paul, he healed the sick. That's what he did. But it was for the sake of the gospel, not the stuff that they talk about today in the prosperity gospel of lies. So, he was put before kings and, you know, ultimately probably Nero, right? And so there it is. So, you know, if you're going to refute who Paul was, you're going to refute who Luke was, you're going to refute what the own apostles said about Paul in the meetings that they had with Paul, and that they said, yes, you go to the Gentiles. How else? Are you going to tell me how this got around the world? It was by Paul's writings. The conclusion to this is read both of them. Just read the Bible. I think that gaining an understanding of doctrine is very important, because the things that Paul teaches, if you spend the time to understand, will keep you away from people like him. And him I'm talking about is a certain person who has a lot of subs. It's not just him, it's other people that I've seen. But the one that I have in mind, I don't like pointing out people. Yeah. And then, you know, it's like, we live in such an evil day that the algorithm, you know, if you say, you know, on YouTube, don't recommend this channel to me, within a week, there'll be like 5 of his videos. That's the way they program it. So, in any case, I tried to do that without having things in front of me. It could be a lot better, yes, but but I just like doing it that way. So, you know, and another thing is, one of the tough things about this is if you hadn't heard someone that was like that, that's saying Paul is the people that Jesus told us to look out for. If you hadn't heard that yet and you had studied the Bible first, then you would understand. But since you heard this before your journey, you get it? Midpoint in your journey of learning the Scriptures, then you're going to have a hard time with someone like him. So guys, I hope this helped you in some way. I do this, man, with, you know, as I'm speaking here right now, it feels like there's a nail in my stomach. That's what I have to tolerate in these videos. So my ability to think clearly is much diminished. You know, I'm used to these types of things, but it's not like it ever makes it better. You know, it builds resilience and stuff like that. But yeah, I try my best, guys. But so the reason I don't like looking at my comment section anymore, as I said, because some of the things make me upset in there, but I just don't want to see things anymore. You guys know that I love you and stuff, but I leave it open anyways. I don't turn my comments off. I leave it on for you guys to have a discussion, and I think that's necessary. But God bless.